Okay, welcome to, well, I guess the last week of new material. Unless something goes strange and I have to cover some more stuff next week, and I'm not planning on it. Next week will be just set aside for a little bit of light review. All right, so if you remember, last week we dealt with files. Okay, I showed you how to read in the contents of a file and how to process them. And in today's lecture, what I want to cover is something called CSV files, because they're really, really critical, because a whole lot of systems use them. So it's probably worthwhile to at least know how to deal with these ones. All right, so before we actually begin on the slides, here, let me, or do I want to start the slides and switch over? Okay, I could probably work either way. All right, I think it works perfectly fine. So yeah, it shows up in a CSV module. It's one of those appendices. All right, so what is this? Okay, CSV is something called comma-separated values. Okay, so what they are, they're a bunch of values that are separated by comma, yeah, okay, good. All right, so what exactly is this format? Okay, it falls into something called a text file format. Now, I suppose what I should do is I should probably explain what a text file format is, because we don't get a chance to deal with these things very much. So give me a second. Here, let me throw away this. I will have to go off to the internet and find something. So onto the internet, well, we'll find a picture of a cat. Okay, because, you know, there's always going to be pictures of cats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this image as, let's see, the downloads. Okay, throw it in here into this thing called CSV, and I'm just going to call this a cat photo. But, you know, most photos end in the extension JPEG or PNG or GIF, GIF, or maybe some other types. Well, what happens if you simply call it this? Well, first of all, it says, are you sure? Because it's actually supposed to be a JPEG image. And I'm just going to say, yeah, go ahead and use it anyway. Okay, excellent. So here we go. Cat picture is done. Okay, we'll toss it away. And of course, well, you know, if you come over to here, and here you go, here's the cat photo. Now, normally, if it was actually a cat photo and you double click on it, what would happen? Well, Windows would be smart enough and say, hey, that ends in .png, so I'm going to open it up using a photo viewer. If it ends in .txt, on the other hand, what happens is your computer will say, oh, that's a txt file. I'm going to open up a notepad, or the equivalent text edit here in the world of Mac. Okay, so sorry, it's gone to the other screen, but I can bring it back so you can enjoy the picture of the cat. So what do you think? Look like a nice picture of a cat? Yeah, it's really just kind of a complete disaster, isn't it? Yeah, there's, what this is, these files, especially image files and so on, they fall into a category called a binary file because they contain binary information, okay? With a text file, you can actually open up text files using things like Notepad, and you can actually see the information there. That's why if you've ever tried doing this to, say, a Word document, you'll go, what is all this? You might see a few letters here and there, but otherwise it just looks like a complete scrambled mess because, well, it's not put into a format that's supposed to be read by a text editor. All right, so back over to my slides then. Okay, which one's the slide icon? This one right here. All right, so back over to here. So it's a text file format, which means that we could actually open up the files using Notepad if we wanted to. And what it's used for storing records of information. Okay, records of information. Another name that we've been using instead of a record, well, sorry, it's not another name. We have been using dictionaries to store this type of information. Okay, so it's a whole bunch of different values. Of course, we use other formats as well, like lists of tuples and so on. But every record is stored, every value in the record is separated by a comma. And it's really important because admittedly, every system on the planet knows how to deal with CSV output and CSV input. All right, and usually, but not always, has a header row to name the field so you have some idea what's going on. All right, and you can see that I put a nice little extension, or one little example at the bottom. Okay, so based on the information, okay, let's find out if you can interpret. I'm pretty sure you can. What type of information do you think I've got inside the box?
Student
student information, okay? And every row, okay, well, I'm going to ask some other questions. How many students do you think I have there? 3. That seems pretty reasonable. Could I ask you what Omar's GPA is? GPA. That would be pretty impressive if he had a 600 GPA. All right, so I think you mean the 2.95. Okay, excellent. If I asked the ID, you were completely right. All right, pretty easy to understand, right? Oh, how did you know that the third column was a GPA and it wasn't that the first column was a GPA, besides the fact that it was just kind of a really big number? Could you tell? Because it says right up top, yeah, it's called a header. Very, very common to include headers on things. All right, and it's exactly for this. It's to be able to give you some context and know what's going on. All right, yeah, so this is a bunch of information, and yeah, this is a very, very common format. Like, for example, one thing that I can do with D2L is I can go into the gradebook and say, okay, give me all the grades, and it will ask me, would you like that in CSV format? If it shows up in CSV format, it looks very similar to this. I see an ID, I see a name, I see this is the score on Lab 1, Lab 2, Lab 3, Lab 4, and so on. And then, of course, well, then I can do something with it. What can you do with a CSV file? Okay, well, here, let's give you some ideas what you can do with a CSV file. All right, first of all, I'm just going to copy everything, okay, because that'll save me from having to type it. And I am going to open up, give me a second, I'm going to open up my text editor over here. Okay, and I'm going to paste this in here. I can make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Okay, that's what I've pasted. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save it. Okay, let me go over here to download. So inside grading CSV files. All right, untitled. Well, I suppose it could work. Let me call it students. And I could call it .txt. The file format is going to work exactly the same, except, you know, just for fun, I'm going to put a different name on this. I'm going to stick the letter CSV. Normally, when you have comma-separated value files, you usually use the extension CSV. You don't have to, but usually you do. And they won't find anything in here, but here we go. We save it, and you have to give me a second because, as usual, MySQL Workbench is jumping for my attention. Okay, let me put that away. All right, so we've saved the file. Let me show you inside the file system Explorer. Here we go. There is the students.csv. Now you'll notice something a little bit different has happened here. The cat photo, because it ended in .txt, it put one type of icon, and because students.csv ended in .csv, it put a slightly different icon. I hope you recognize the icon. Yeah, it's Excel. That's because my Mac is set up so that if you double click on one of these files, it opens up the file in Excel. Okay, so if I double click on this, okay, sorry, it's popping up in another window. Here we go. And yeah, that's, there you go. And it's nice enough, it even knows how to split everything apart, put it into different columns, so that if I wanted to, I could do something like I could compute the, not the absolute value, but maybe the average of the GPAs and so on, because now I got it over here. Now I can do all kinds of cool stuff. All right, so it's a text file format that I can open up in Excel. If I wanted to take this and put it into a database, yeah, databases usually have an import for dealing with these types of things. And likewise, I can take any Excel spreadsheet and I can save it as a .csv file. And then, of course, well, I can read it into other applications. What other applications? Well, whatever applications you want, including ones you write yourself. Question?
What if the cat picture we put it as .csv?
Oh, okay. I figured somebody was going to ask that. Actually, I was tempted about doing that. All right. All right. Here's what would end up happening. CSV. Now, I'm going to ask you: is it actually a CSV file? No. But if I rename it, first of all, it's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? Because that would be kind of a little weird. But yeah, if I go for it, yeah, now it says, yeah, if I open up the cat photo, if I double click on this, it's going to pop open Excel. Okay, but is it actually something that Excel can deal with? And the answer is no, actually it isn't. Okay, just a second. I'm actually surprised it gave me as much as it did. Okay, and here's what it'll look like, which is pretty much the same stuff. I was actually expecting to just say that's not a file that I can open. Okay, but I suppose it's CSV. It basically just took its chances and said, well, if they want to open it, I'll open it. So yeah, the extension, by the way, doesn't change the type of a file. It just simply changes for your operating system to know what you're going to open when you double click on it. Okay, all right. And if, of course, if I change it back to a JPEG, it should actually open up as a picture. This one, I don't know for sure what's going to happen. Okay, JPG, yes, go back. I have a feeling that it might be corrupted at this point. Actually, surprisingly, yeah, it was it. It's just that the other applications have no idea how to interpret it. All right, so let's get rid of this one, and let's go back to what the whole purpose of what we're doing today. Okay, and that is, okay, we can obviously use it to open things up in different programs, and of course the most important thing is, well, opening up your own program. Okay, because this is what we're learning how to deal with, is how to write programs. All right, so here's what we're going to do is we're going to try writing a small program for reading that information. Now, unfortunately, the file as it is right now is sitting on my Mac. So, oh yeah. No, it depends on how your operating system is set up. When you buy a Mac, it opens up in something called Apple Numbers. Okay, but then I installed Excel, and then Apple put it back, and then I set it back again. Because Apple wants to take over the universe, and usually if I've got CSV files, I probably want it open in Excel. No, it depends on how your computer is set. Okay, now the problem with my file at the moment is the file is sitting here on my Mac, but unfortunately, well, you know that we've been using this editor over here, and unfortunately I have to get the file over here. So no, it's not possible for the browser to read a file off of your hard drive. That would be a serious security violation, so that simply isn't allowed. That's the reason, of course, why we've got this little thing in here called the file manager. Okay, so I need to go and I need to make a brand new file, and okay, for a lack of anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this students. Okay, yeah, it ends in .txt, but it doesn't matter. And what have I got? Excellent, that's exactly what I want. Okay, well, let's see if we can deal with this CSV file. Now, it turns out that there's kind of two ways how to deal with this file. I don't want to call it the easy way and the hard way, because neither are really difficult, but it is just a little bit different. So let me get over to here so I make sure I don't miss any of these things. All right, so as a quick review of last week, let's just get the file open. Okay, so, because remember, you can't read a file until open it. Okay, so I'll call it the student file. The student file. All right, and how do you open a file? Open. All right, remember the parameter? Yeah, there are two parameters you need to pass in. The first parameter, name of the file. Okay, so we called it student.txt or students? Students, okay. If this doesn't work, it's your fault. Okay, and there's a second parameter that we need, which is to tell me, are we opening up so that we can write information to it, or read information, or possibly do both? Writing would take whatever I've got and would completely destroy it. Okay, so therefore, let's open it for reading. You could also open up for A, which is appending, which says, okay, add things to the end. But what I'm interested in doing with my data today is I'd like to bring it in so that we can calculate the average GPA. Sorry, it's not actually here, okay? But we'll make that a use case. So a use case, by the way, is just something we're trying to do. So let's read all of the data and calculate the average GPA of all the students. Okay, well, before we get there, we'll start by simply printing all the students. And then we'll calculate the average, because if you can't print it, you certainly can't do this. All right, and if you use a W, whatever's there is bye-bye, you just erased it. Okay, you can open things up for RW, which allows you to read and write. If I had more time, I would cover it, but for this course, just reading, just writing, that'll be fine. And of course, appending. All right, so here we go. That's the first thing. Let's just get through and actually take a look at what I've got. Because you know that you're very used to me going through and saying, you know what, let's print things. Oh, and by the way, this could all go into a function, but just we'll avoid the hassle. We won't make a function for it. Yeah, start by printing everything. So can you just print student file? Did I try this last week? Student file. Let's go for it. Yeah, that's basically a file. Okay, yeah, you don't get to see what's on the inside. You only get to see what's on the inside if you actually read it. Now, we went through last week a few operations. For example, I showed you how to read stuff. The operation's called read. There was one called read lines, which reads absolutely everything. But to be honest, one of the easiest ways to deal with a text file is to do this. Oh, what's in a text file? It's a line. In student file, print line. And what this will do is this will go through each line off the student file, which is nice, and it automatically stops at the very end. Yeah.
Did you mean to say for line?
Oh, yeah, for. Did I say from or form? Sorry, I'm teaching the other course. Anyway, yeah, for line and student file. Okay, let's take a look at it. All right, do we see the information? Yeah, we do. There's one kind of little weird thing, and you'll notice that every line seems to be double spaced. Okay, so what's happening with this? Unfortunately, this is really, really difficult for me to show. Okay, but I'll try. All right. Okay, what have I done here? What I've done is I put a single quote at the beginning of the string and a single quote at the end of the string. Okay, just so I can see, is there extra stuff? Take a look at this. You'll notice that the single quote shows up, and we'll just pick the very first line, but then the closing quote didn't happen until the next line. Yeah, okay. Well, that kind of makes maybe a bit of sense. If you remember what what the file looked like, this is what it looked like before I saved it. And yeah, the way how CSV files work, the way how any text file works in any operating system, by the way, is how many characters are on the first line. Okay, I don't trust you to count. Okay, because it is kind of a bit tricky, but we'll count together. Okay, here we go. So let's count the characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And there's one more that you can't see. It's 12. 12, the character at position number 12 is the enter key that I pressed when I made the file. It's called a new line character, \n. The \n is there. You can't see it, but you know it's there because it's causing an extra blank line. It's causing this quotation mark to fall down to the very next line. Okay, so unfortunately, this is the reality when you read lines of file from a text file, that new line character gets added to the end. And it's not something we've ever had to deal with when we're dealing with the input statement, but even the input statement, it may have it sitting at the end. We just tend not to look at it because most of the time we just convert it to an int and we say, okay, whatever. All right, if you really want to get rid of that new line character, which we probably do want to get rid of, usually what you have to do is you have to clean up the line. Okay, so for example, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have something called clean line, and I'm just going to get rid of the extra stuff that I don't need. All right, there's an operation. I don't know if it was ever covered in infs 1101. It probably wouldn't make any sense. It's called strip. What it does is it gets rid of extra space at the end, and it gets rid of new line characters. Okay, so if I were to print out what I call the clean line, and a lot of people would just say line is equal to line.strip. That's fine. Now you can see that I've got everything on a single line. Of weird double spacing has gone away. The quotation marks are showing up before and the end of the line. Okay, excellent. That's the very first thing I wanted to do. And this is one of the, I don't want to call it a downside, but it's the reality of working with files. Okay, it's one of these weird quirks. Yeah, you just have to do it. All right, now, this is great. But of course, remember, each one of these lines is a comma-separated value set of information, okay? Because I've got a whole bunch of data, and they're separated by commas. And I don't have commas in the middle. That becomes a real trouble, by the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you, I think we may have covered it one other time. However, we're going to cover it now. And that is if each line happens to represent some, well, let's call it the student data, because that's really what it is. The operation is called split. Now, we've seen join before. So what does join do? Well, join takes a list of a bunch of strings, you put a character, and suddenly it joins it together by putting commas or X's or dots, whatever it happens to be, between each of the values. And split, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. It takes a string and it splits it according to whatever characters you want. We'll have to do a couple of examples. Okay, so here we go. Student data, I'm going to go to the clean line, and I'm going to call split. And I'm going to say, please split it based on the commas. And I'm going to print the student data so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so remember what it, and you know what, just make it completely clear. I'm going to print the clean line first. There you go. So there's kind of the before and the after. It happens a bunch of times. All right, so take the very last line. You see, this was the string. And when I called split, what did I get? I got a list with how many values? 3 values. It's exactly the 3 values because there was exactly 2 commas between them. Okay? All right, so I think it's probably safe to say that that's a very useful operation when you're dealing with CSV files because you want to be able to break up the information this way. Now, this is great, except that we have a little tiny bit of a problem, and this has to do with the types. Okay, so let me highlight a couple of things, and first of all I'm going to ask is, what type is the thing I just highlighted? It's a string. That makes a lot of sense. What type is this thing right here? It's a string. Is that appropriate for an ID number? Take the database course, you'll find out. Okay. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. If you want to be an integer, okay, we'll fix that. And this one right here, that is also a string. Now, unfortunately, if I were to take all of those strings representing the GPAs and add them up, I'm not actually going to get a sum of the GPAs. What I'm going to get is I'm going to get a big long thing of all the GPAs concatenated. All right, so we have ourselves a little bit of an issue, but you know what? It's going to be fun. Let's do it. Why not cause the problems? All right, so let's have something called the GPA sum. There we go, GPA sum. Okay. No. I'm supposed to have 0. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to make it a string because we know that they're strings. All right, so since we're here, we'll continue to print things, but I'm going to go to GPA sum, and I'm going to say take the old GPA sum, and I'm going to take, okay, now, how do I get the GPA? Well, I've got this thing called student data, and it has position 0, 1, 2. Okay, at the very end, let me put in a famous separators and print the GPA sum, and bang, there you go. Yeah, and what that is, that's the concatenation of everything we saw, including the word GPA. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff in here that we have to kind of deal with. All right, but in any case, at least we've got the data out, and it seems like we've got ways to be able to access individual pieces. Do you know this, I mean, if the student data had been in a list, this is exactly how we'd process it. All right, so what are we going to do? Okay, well, if we really wanted to have each of the GPA sums, or actually add it together, obviously what I have to do here is I need to turn this into, well, not an int, probably a float. Okay, so here we go. So you try something like this and you go, yeah, this is definitely going to do it, but is it going to work? And the answer is no, because somebody's immediately going to say, oh, cannot convert string. That's because of this one right here. It shouldn't be an empty string. It should be 0, right? Yeah. Okay, so everything will be fine now. Bad news is, no, it still has a problem. Why? Take a look at the value error. You have to learn how to read these things. Okay, it isn't just like, oh, it's an error, what's wrong? Because you know on tests and so on, we don't give you any help. So what is wrong? It says, could not convert the string to float GPA. Well, take a look at where it crashed. It crashed on the very first line because it actually contained ID name GPA. Because that very first line in my file, that's actually not part of the data. Yeah. That is the header. Okay, that's the header to tell me the names of the columns, but it isn't the actual data. In other words, I have to skip this because it's not part of the data. Okay, enter what I think is like another one of these weird little anomalies. Okay, you work with files, you basically learn very quickly, it's like, okay, I have to deal with this. Unfortunately, the very first row that comes out of your file is going to have the header information, and you don't want it. Okay. There's a few things you can do with the for loop. You could say, okay, run a for loop, count how many lines. If I'm on line number 0, I'll ignore it. There's actually a pretty simple way. It's called next. You can see it's a magic word. You can say next student file, which sounds like you're going to skip the entire file, but what it does is skips one line. Okay, so, and notice that it skips one line before I start iterating through the rest. This is actually the way how you deal with it. And if you were to take the GPA values of 3.23, 389, and 2.95, it will add up to 10.07. Okay, all right, so there we go. This is the way how we deal with these types of things. Now, of course, well, what if I don't want to print these, or if I don't want to do these types of things? What could I do with a bunch of this information? Well, let's do it in a couple of different ways. All right, first one up. I think having maybe a list of students. So here we go. Let me call it the student list. Because now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go from this new kind of weird business dealing with dealing with files into something we already understand. And we understand how to deal with lists of information now. Okay, if I had a bunch of students and I wanted to stick them into a list, what would I use? I'd probably use a list of, what do you think? Okay, a list of what? I mean, this is the lab exam. Obviously I'm not giving you a bunch of raw files, but what have I given you? It would have been a list of lists. Okay, good. Or list of tuples. That's pretty easy, and quite often I use that because the database interactions usually use these things. Or a list of dictionaries, because dictionaries have names, and names are really, really nice. Let's turn it into a list of dictionaries, so that it's back to the same context of what we've already used. Again, this is a problem decomposition. You have a bunch of data, you need to process the data that's inside a file. First thing you do is you load the data from the file, you put it into memory, into something that you already understand, and then you learn how to process the thing that you understand. Yeah, so we're just doing it backwards. All right, so I still continue with the clean line. Okay, I still split the data. Okay, I'm not going to print it anymore because we know it's working. I don't care about the GPA, okay, but what I need to do is I need to take all this information and I need to put it into the student list. All right, so, how do you add something to a student list? Well, an append works really well. Okay, so what could we append? Well, let's try appending it first. What I've got is I've got the student, I should have written smaller. I'm not using data, am I? Okay, sorry. Let me be lazy. Data is fine for me. So what I could do is I could put in data 0, data 1, and data 2. And what I'll do is we'll just look at it and we'll see what we've got in the student list, and then we can talk about if we don't like it or not. Ooh, list append takes exactly, yeah, because I need to pick out either format. It has to be exactly one thing. So let's start off with the easy one, a list of tuples. Okay, so it's a list of tuples. All right, there you go. Is it a list of tuples? And the answer is yes. Do you like the data that's there? No. For example, maybe instead of, here, let me put them on different lines, and this is completely valid, by the way. It just avoids the wrap. Okay. What don't you like about this? Well, the student ID, maybe you don't like the fact that it's string. Okay, no problem. Turn it to an int. And this one down here, the GPA. Okay, we just did this a minute ago. Maybe we turn it into a float. You see, now I've got a lab exam question. Okay, so we've gone from something that was stored in a file to something that we can now handle. All right, and of course, remember that sometimes we don't like lists of tuples because they're a little bit weird to work with. List of dictionaries will give you names. Okay, that's fine. I can easily turn this into a dictionary. All right, use curly braces instead of parentheses. And the very first thing that goes in, well, that's the student ID. The second thing that pops in, that's the name. And the final thing right here, that's the GPA. There we go. Now I've got myself a list of dictionaries. And again, I'm back to lab exam stuff. Okay, so we've now gone from having to have all of these lists of dictionaries hard-coded into our program, and now we can just read the data from a file instead. So instead of having that one huge thing that we had in the library, yeah, that would be much, much nicer if it came from a file. And you'd be doing stuff like this, yeah.
Is there a way to get the keys for the dictionary from the file?
Yeah, of course, because where are they? They're in the header. Yeah, it's not something I'm going to cover today because it's a little bit more advanced, but what you would do is you would read the very first line, okay? And you see what I'm doing right here, I just basically threw it out, but you would read the very first line, and then you'd say, okay, split this up, these are the names of the keys. And now you could build up this thing without having to do this work, okay? In fact, that's really the whole thing that we're going to do. All right, and of course, as I say, now we've got it as an array of dictionaries, or sorry, a list of dictionaries. Now we just process it like the stuff we have been doing before. Okay, now, I'm going to ignore the challenging problem. We'll come back to it. All right, so there was a request. Okay, well, I'm not going to quite do it yet, but just about. Now, this type of thing where you're reading stuff from CSV files, yeah, this happens all the time. It's not just kind of like it's a one thing. I know it's something we only do once in this course, and you probably won't see it so much in a lot of our courses, but if you're working with things and you're working with real data sets, you'll be constantly dealing with these CSV files. Because this happens all the time, yeah, there's things that the Python designers have added to the language, well, to the overall infrastructure, to allow you to make this just a little bit easier. And this is going to be my description. Next is I've got a slightly modified version of the program that I like to work with. I'm still going to have the student list. That's not going to change. So here we go. Student list is equal to an empty list. I'm going to open up the file. I'm going to do all the work. Same thing as before. I suppose I shouldn't have closed everything. All right. These ones a little bit different. So here we go. The data file. Open the file. Open students.txt for reading. Okay, that's fine. Now, normally what I would do is I would then iterate through and print things. Okay, I'm going to change things up a little bit different this time, and I'm going to do something we hardly do in this course, and I'm going to bring in something. All right, so the word import means that, yeah, there's a package out there which does some really cool stuff. The good news about the CSV one is it's already there, and yeah, they've got a package called CSV, and it knows how to read the lines, strip them, split them. In other words, it knows how to deal with all of that stuff. So we don't have to worry about the splitting and the stripping and so on. This will look after it for us automatically. Okay, so then the question becomes, great, if somebody can do something for us, the question then is, how do we use it? Okay, so how do we use it? It requires just a very, very slight, but again, it's like a lot of things that I say here, it's a little strange, okay, but yeah, once you do this one time, then you realize, okay, this is it. What I do is I make something called a reader, okay? This is the process that we use. You go off to the CSV package and you say, okay, give me a reader which is attached to the data file. Okay, so it's just one extra line. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through for line in data reader, print line. Print a line, maybe. Let me get rid of everything else. Okay, make it as simple as possible. All right, compared to what I did before, the only thing that I've done is, before I said for line in data file, this time I'm saying for line in data reader, where the data reader is the CSV reader, which is connected to the data file. Take a look at the output. That was a whole lot easier. I didn't have to worry about splitting anything. I didn't have to worry about stripping anything. Yeah, the CSV package did it for me automatically. Of course, I still need to do things with it. I would still need to take things and put it into, say, a bunch of tuples or a bunch of dictionaries myself. But hey, yeah, this is, if you start to learn how to use these packages, this can really speed up a lot of stuff. At any point, by the way, on the final exam, if I ask you for reading a CSV file, if you want to use this approach, it's fine. If you want to not use the approach, do the first one, that's also completely fine. Okay, so yes, it is available. All right, here is the one thing that it knows how to deal with, which is really, really bizarre. Okay, let me open up the file, and I don't know, suppose that Ahmed Ali for some reason has a comma in the middle of his name. That's not going to work very well, is it? Because think about the split. The first line would split into an ID, an Ed Ali, and a 3.23. Yeah, these are called tricky CSV problems. How do you deal with commas in the middle of people's names? And you say, well, just don't have a comma in names. Trust me, this happens. If you get a list of movies and say, cool, I'm going to load up all these movies into my system, my Python program, so that I can do some analysis about which movies are more popular, it works perfectly fine until you find a comma. And guess what? There are movies titles that have commas in them. So unfortunately, we have to deal with them. There is an official standard which says that if you have a comma in a field, all that you need to do is to put everything inside a quotation mark. Unfortunately, the split operation doesn't know how to deal with that. However, the little CSV package actually does. So somewhere in here, there's a button. I want to make sure I click on the right one. My CSV package, on the other hand, actually knows how to do this already. So that's cool, okay? And this would be a lot of code to do this without. And don't worry, I'm not going to throw one of these things at you and say, hey, do this by hand. It's just logic at this point. But yeah, it already knows how to deal with the quotation marks. It says, okay, if you find something in quotes, go to find the closing quote and include the commas without splitting it. All right, so there we go. That's the next piece. How are we doing for time? Okay, yeah, we'll finish a little bit soon today, and I think that's fine. All right, now somebody gave me a challenge a little while ago and said, hey, is there some way of getting the information about the names of the fields? And of course, the answer is, of course. Why? Well, because it's there already. It is there in the first line. Now, if you leave that first line out, we're going to have some problems, and I don't mind messing around with that. But yes, there's the change to my program is actually really simple. Instead of using a reader, you use something called a dictionary reader. No, just slightly different spelling. Yeah, that's it. Take a look at this output. That is highly, highly convenient. This automatically gives me a bunch of dictionaries. What can I do with them? I can store them inside a dictionary. I can store them inside a list. I guess I could store them inside a set, if that made any sense, providing you could store a set or a dictionary inside a set, which I don't believe you can. All right, and well, okay, so here we go. A student list. Okay, fine. Instead of printing it, all that I would have to do is say student list.append and line. Well, it's not really a line anymore, but that's all right. We'll change the name in a second. There you go. There's my list of dictionaries. Really convenient. Yeah, that's what these packages are used for. It's used for doing really, really convenient things. I probably wouldn't call it a line anymore. I would probably call it a student. You could spell it correctly. There you go. I'd probably call it a student. So at this point, you could even do something like, okay, if the student GPA, oh, well, here's a problem. Okay, here's the only downside to this entire thing. All right, what format is the ID? It's a string. What format is the GPA? It's a string. So what you would have to do with this, if you want to use it, it's completely fine, but you'd have to go through and you'd have to convert everything again. And that's kind of gross. Not impossible, just kind of gross. So you're getting something, but you're maybe not getting as much stuff as you want. Okay, well, you know what? We can fix it. Okay, here we go. Student ID should be actually equal to an integer of the student ID. Okay, and the student's GPA should be equal to a float of the student's GPA. Okay, and of course the one on the right hand side is the one we just read from the file. This is the one we're about to put in. Okay, yeah, so a little inconvenient here. You're responsible for dealing with conversions. Okay, for those who carry on and do a course in WebTech 1 and WebTech 2, we learned this the hard way, that pretty much everything gets sent around as strings, which always require all sorts of conversion like this. Okay, but there we go. Let me see what else I've got in here. I've actually got most things done. Ooh. Do I even want to cover that one? Okay, that's... I'm trying to figure out which ones I've done, which ones I want to talk about. I think I've actually covered just about everything. Okay, we got one final... Oh, now I know. Nobody wants to put up their hand to suggest this. People are always asking for weird things. Okay, where did it pick up the words ID, name, and GPA? Yeah, from the header, okay. So what if the header was wrong? Let me get rid of this for a second because it's going to cause me all kinds of trouble. You see, if I go back to my file manager, open up the file, and I call this the average. Okay, and I have to make it just a touch smaller, and it's this one right here, and close it. Yeah, it will actually name that the average. It's going to pick up the names. So then the really important thing is, well, what happens if it's just missing altogether? Okay. Okay. Just to make this less weird, let's get rid of the comma in the middle of that person's name. Okay, and let's save this one and close. And my question is when I run this, what's going to happen? Error. Okay, that's a reasonable guess. Anybody got another suggestion? It will think the first line is the header. So what's going to happen is instead of picking up the actual things, it says that the of this very first student, the Ahmed Ali is Fatma Hansen, and the second student's Ahmed Ali is Omar Khan, which is really, really strange. But what it's done is literally has looked at the first line and said, oh, that must be a header. Yeah, there's options in here for saying, yeah, don't skip any lines, or the header isn't there, but please use the following things. This is beyond the scope of what we need to learn in this course, so I won't show them to you, but you can go and you can look up online about how to put in your own header if the thing happens to be missing from the file. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. Fortunately, I would actually demonstrate this with an export from a grade book, but I don't have any grade books except for real live ones, and I don't want to show people's grades. So sorry, sometimes I have some data sitting around, but not this time. Yeah.
In the exam, we will have to go into the file manager itself? Or
yeah, if you're dealing with anything with the file manager, you're going to have to go into the file manager.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the way how these things would work is I would give you some kind of a question to say, okay, you have the following file. And if you wanted to write a function that can read the file and do something, yeah, you'd have to go and use the file manager to make the file, copy, paste the data in. Okay? All right, I've got just one final thing. So what I'm going to do, let me hard code up some data, and let's talk about sending some data out. So here we go. Student list. Okay, let's make a list of students. Okay. Okay. ID 6006 1234. Name. I should have stored this somehow or another. Anyway, here we go. And GPA 3.4. Okay, there's one student. We will only do a couple. ID 6031. Okay, name. Okay, here we go. A couple of students. Okay, just two students. All right, now what is it that I want to do here? I've got one final slide, which is called writing to a CSV file. The cool thing about writing to a CSV file, it is so much easier than reading from them because you are in control. When you're reading, you have no idea what to expect. And that actually becomes really important because on Wednesday's class, I'm going to talk about exception handling, which is what happens when something goes wrong to your program. And of course, well, yeah, it crashes. Well, that's perfectly fine, but what if you don't want it to crash? Right? Because sometimes you open up files, like for example, okay, you know, in Microsoft Word, you can have many documents open. So let's suppose you have a document open, you're working on something, and so you try to open up another document, but it's got some bad input, and all of Microsoft crashes, and you lose all your data. Are you happy? And the answer is, of course, not. So you have to learn how to write programs that don't crash when things go wrong. That's exception handling. That's 2 days from now. All right, in any case, what I want to do here today is I just want to write some data out to a CSV file, just so we've got a bunch of data. Maybe we read this from a file. We're doing some transformation on the data, and we're going to write it back out. So I'll show you just the second half of it. Okay, so how do you deal with writing stuff out? Well, you have to open up a file. All right, so we'll call it result.txt. Okay, it could be anything at all. And of course, if we're going to be putting data there, it would be a write. Now remember, what's going to happen is this is going to get rid of everything that already exists. All right, so a writer. Okay, sorry, I just realized that I removed something. Okay, import CSV. All right, so if you wanted to use that CSV package, yeah, you'd set yourself up a writer, okay, on the student file. Okay, so like we had a reader before, now we've got a writer. Okay, and all I'm going to do is for s in student list. Okay, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to print s for right now. Okay, bang, there you go. There's the 2 students. That's not a big surprise. Instead of printing it to the screen, well, I want it to go somewhere else. All right, well, there is something now called a writer, because it shows up on line 10, and the operation is called write row. And what you do is you give it a list of things that you want to send out. So what would we like to send out? Well, we would probably like to send SID and maybe S's name. So that would send out the name of the student and the ID of the student. Okay, and at the very end, student file close, because if you don't close the file, you could end up some issues. All right, let's clear the output and watch this. This is so exciting. It does absolutely nothing. It did run, but of course we don't see anything because we didn't print anything. But over here in the file manager, you'll see that there is a result.txt file, and if you peek inside, you can see that, hey, yeah, it's actually gone and it's created the CSV file with the commas exactly right. Everything is fine in exactly the right format. And if we do something weird, like we start sticking in commas in the middle of Ahmed's name, okay, so here, let me run this once again. It already knows how to deal with those things. Okay, so it knows to put the quotation marks around. It's really, really convenient for extracting files. Now, the really cool thing about this, if you were to take this program and run it on the laptop, that would create a file locally. If it ends in .csv, you double click on it, it opens up in Excel. Now you can continue to do your work. And quite often I do stuff like this because sometimes you're looking for very, very complex things that really can't be done using Excel. You know what? I'm right in the middle of something right now. I can give you an idea if I have it open. Okay, now this will be fine. Just give me 1 second. And I give you the idea about the types of things that we do work on. Okay, here and here. Sorry, just need to sanitize and make sure I'm not giving away any data. All right, so there's nothing funny about this. All this is a list of sections. All right, so here's something that I was asked to do. I was asked to give a list of courses where one instructor is doing the lecture and you have different people doing the lab sections. Not exactly your situation right here. All right, like for example, if you're here in section 1 and you could be in one of 2 sections by Hassan or by Sasan. I mean, these are things. So in other words, what I need here is a solution for, well, basically it should say that there are 4 people teaching this section 1. There are 4 people involved. And it has to do with gradebook matching and so on. All right, not a big deal. I can do this by hand. For the entire institution, no way. I'm not going to do that. So I could put this into a spreadsheet, by the way, but there's no formulas that will tell me this answer. This is literally a Python programming thing where you go through and you say, okay, is it this? Is it a lab? Is it a lab? And you start counting things. The program is up here. It's a little bit different, by the way, because I'm pulling stuff out of a database. But you know what happens when I do fetch all? It's the same thing as going to the CSV file and saying, okay, give me everything. The format's the same. It's a list of tuples. And then, of course, I'm doing stuff, and eventually I'm writing it back out. I just happen to be writing it back out to Excel. Okay, but I could easily put it into a CSV file and open it up. In fact, I was thinking of doing that, and I thought, well, why I just write it directly to Excel. So sometimes you have data that comes from basically an Excel source, but you need to process it in kind of what I call an algorithmic way. That's what Python is for. Then after I've massaged it and I have the correct numbers, then I save it back out so I can bring it back into Excel again. This is the power of using Python. And if you say, yeah, but I don't like it and so on, yeah, but can you imagine trying to process the 5,000 courses by hand? Would you want to do that? And the answer is absolutely not. So being able to read and write files is really important. Being able to read and write Excel files is really related to CSV files. If you can't do CSV files, you can't do what I'm doing here. It's more complicated because, well, we've got multiple spreadsheets or multiple sheets within documents and so on. And the same thing, if you're not able to read from a file, you also won't be able to read from a database either, because it's even more conceptually difficult. All right, so there you go. This is the material I wanted to cover for dealing with files. All right, so the usual question, I know the question has popped up before, is like, is there files on the final exam? Yeah, it's fair game. This is the stuff that we haven't had a chance to test you on. So yeah, you can't just look at this and go, good, it's all finished. No, because there's still like the material here this week, and yeah, it's everything goes on. Okay, so just in case you've heard rumors from other students before saying, yeah, the files won't be there. Yeah, that's not true. Okay, it would fall into the same category of rumors saying, yeah, in the lab exam there's no dictionaries. Yeah, sometimes that's true, but not this semester, and this is certainly true as well for files in the final. So yes, learn some stuff about files. They're not fundamentally difficult, but of course if you never tried them, you'll really struggle with them. All right, that's it for the day. We'll come back on Wednesday and we'll talk about exception handling, which is completely different, but somehow related to files.